Sorry, here. I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to make that 3 points that are hopefully provocative. First of all, I'm going to argue that cap and trade mechanisms haven't worked, and the Kyoto Protocol, in a sense, is a kind of form of a kind of global cap and trade mechanism in that way. And the carbon tax would be much more effective. It will also provide revenue that could help support complementary activities by governments. And, secondly, I'm going to argue that we need to focus on more immediate costs and benefits of climate change, and on self-interest. This is a conference about tax justice, but for a lot of people, it's important to focus on self-interest. Appealing to charitable intentions and making sacrifices now for future generations might work with some of us, but not for all of us. And thirdly, to address climate change and tax justice, we should implement a broad-based carbon tax with a simple, transparent, and very progressive tax refund. It'd be best if there's an international agreement on that, but if not, we should also have border tax adjustment measures to incent other countries to introduce similar measures. Now, because there are a number of lawyers in the room, I thought I should start with a legal disclaimer. And that is that I'm an economist, not a lawyer. I'm a practicing political economist working for a labor union, not an academic economist. Thirdly, these views are my own. My union supports carbon pricing, but not necessarily a carbon tax. And then fourth, my presentation includes a picture of a cat. So for those who might be allergic to pictures of cats, you can leave the room now. For those who want to stay, I will buy a drink for whoever first identifies it. And I expected Allison to be there. So, going back to the Stern review of climate change, Lord Stern argued that the climate change is a result of the greatest market failure the world has seen. I would debate that. I think that the Great Depression was a greater market failure, but that's a quibble. He estimated future damages from climate change at 5 to 20% of world GDP. A lot of those are in the future, and it depends on what discount rate you use, and he was criticized for that. But an important point is that the poorest countries and people will suffer the most. He called for a price on carbon or environmental tax through cap and trade, tax or regulation. He's kind of agnostic about what. We felt there was discussion that they would be similar, except that there's more price certainty with a carbon tax and more quantity certainty with a cap and trade. Proposals for a carbon tax from Nordhaus, who's a well-known environmental economist, suggested a carbon tax at $30 a ton, rising to $85 a ton by mid-century. Consistent with some idea of what the economic costs are. What has happened since then? This is a chart with CO2 emissions. They've declined a little bit in Europe and industrialized countries. A lot of that was because of the financial crisis. That increased a lot in China and other countries that were not covered under the Kyoto Protocol. Now, this is a chart that I made of the global CO2 emissions and world economic growth. I was surprised I couldn't find one online that I could just filter. But what I did there was I put the global world product, the kind of like the GDP at a global level, in 1980 dollars, just so you can see it fairly similar. They move remarkably close together. There are some efficiency gains. There's a little bit of narrowing of that, but not a great deal. You see how it dips down there. Getting to cap and trade schemes. In Canada, there's actually one that's run by Alberta, which is a big fossil fuel producer. A large share of the credits or the offsets that companies can buy go to farmers to not till their fields, i.e. to do nothing. that amount has been reduced in recent years, but a lot of this just went to people to do nothing. And a substantial amount of that went to middlemen on that. The EU emissions trading system, this is the third phase right now. There's been high price volatility. Almost, some studies have said almost zero impact on emissions. Others might disagree, but high price volatility has caused problems for it. The UN Clean Development Mechanism, there have been widespread problems with that, questions about its additionality, and criticisms of it in that some of the credits have gone to support some negative projects in the developing world. About 57% of the emission credits that went for reductions of fluorophores and nitrous oxides, which are very potent GHGs. But what was happening was that companies in China were setting up factories just to close them down, so to get the credits for doing that. And that was about 57% of the credits on that. Kyoto Protocol, I would argue, in some ways was a kind of form of a global cap and trade agreement. There are no penalties, and now it's somewhat comatose. Moving on to kind of political calculus, this was a comment, this is a quote that our Prime Minister made just about a week or so ago when he met with the new Australian Prime Minister who just killed their carbon tax. Says that it's not that we don't seek to deal with climate change, but we seek to deal with it in a way that will protect and enhance our ability to create jobs and growth, not destroy jobs and growth in our country. And that's been the view there, that if we introduce measures, cap and trade or carbon tax, that it will destroy jobs and growth. They produced a study saying that if you wanted to reduce emissions to the amount that was required, you'd have to increase carbon taxes to about $200, and that would devastate the economy. And that was one of the reasons that they used for not pursuing it. So, what about destroying jobs and growth? What I found really interesting recently is the insurance industry has come out with a whole lot of reports, or a number of different reports documenting the costs of climate change. The graph at the top there is something from Swiss Re, which is a reinsurance, the big reinsurance company based in Switzerland, of course. And it's a number of weather-related catastrophes. They also focus on climate change. The bottom figure is the average losses and the insured losses for different decades. And those have still at 0.2% of GDP, but increasing quite rapidly. So the point of this is we are feeling the effects now. It's not something abstract in the future that we need discount rates to calculate in present values. And it's not necessarily just something that's happening to people in other parts of the world. And that should inform the mentality of our Prime Minister, who is conducted, and his backbenchers who have conducted an ongoing campaign against carbon taxes. I love the symbolism of these pictures and the floods. There were massive floods. This is exactly a year ago today in Alberta. The cost of those floods were estimated at $5 billion. The insured damages at $1.7 billion. It's one of the most damaging floods in Canada's history. But there are people either swimming away from their cars or else putting their heads into their cars. There are also big floods in Toronto. So these are damages from climate change, and we see one of the causes of it there, the cars. There are escalating costs for governments. Another picture here, natural catastrophes. This is from the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Natural catastrophes are expected to cost Canada about $21 to $40 billion by 2050, up from $1 billion average in recent years. And for households, I calculated the increase in the all-item CPI, the inflation rate, versus homeowners insurance. Homeowners insurance has more than doubled in Canada since the year 2000, and all-item CPI has increased by about 30%. So it's increased at almost 3 times the rate on an annual basis. So the problems, greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise globally. Kyoto mechanisms and global agreements haven't necessarily worked all that way. There's little appetite from some for measures that will cost people now for uncertain benefits that flow in future into others. At the same time, we have rising inequality, weak economies, and deficits. The impacts of climate change are more immediate and forceful than expected. Climate change impacts and mitigation hurt the lowest incomes the most. And lower incomes can't afford investments for efficiency and mitigation. I'm able to buy a Prius car, but lower income people can't do that. It was interesting reading the Stern review. The Stern review wondered why people were making investments that had high payoffs. They said that people were capital constrained. In other words, they're poor, they don't have the money. So in order to invest in mitigation measures or efficiency measures, you've got to have the money. A way forward, need to focus, and I look at this from a practical perspective, practical and political perspective. Need to focus on the direct costs and benefits and make those connections. You need a simple, transparent, and progressive carbon tax that after credits and refunds benefits the majority of households. Additional revenues should be used to support complementary investments in green jobs. As I said before, estimates are that a carbon tax to reduce our emissions to the level that we had agreed to would have to be about $200. That is not possible, and what we really do need is a whole toolbox of different measures, and the carbon tax is just one of those, but the revenues from it can help to support other measures. As I said, best to have an international agreement on it, but if that doesn't work, hopefully countries can proceed with border adjustments and tariffs as mechanisms for other countries to introduce similar measures with exemptions for lower income measures. Now I think Tracy is going to get a little bit more into this discussion, hopefully, as well. The model that we've had, and I've been part of in Canada with the federal budget, is a carbon tax, initially at $30 a ton, but sending a strong price signal but through increases. Integrated with provincial carbon tax systems, because BC has now got its own carbon tax. It would raise overall revenues about $15 billion, maybe a little bit more, but make adjustments for border tax mechanisms that would be lower. But then have a very visible green tax refund. I did some calculations at about $300 per person. You make it look bigger, pull it back for higher family incomes. That would the refund would be about $7.5 billion a year, and you'd have about $7.5 billion after that. I think it's really important to make it very visible and simple and transparent in order to get public buy-in, but then also to make it harder to get rid of it, like Australia has just done. This is a distributional impact. This is something I did a number of years ago, but it gives you a sense of it. The red bars are the average direct cost of a carbon tax for households. It's not the total cost, because about 1/3 of the carbon emissions that each household is responsible for comes from their direct emissions. The other 2/3 is embodied in the things that they buy. But it would be quite progressive up until kind of middle income levels. So that's a proposal. And that's it. Thanks.